Hey, it's Jason Creel. I wanted to talk to you about how to have a great looking lawn, or in this case, we're going to talk about how to have the best lawn in the neighborhood. So let's first establish that depending on what neighborhood you live in, having the best lawn in that neighborhood may require different things. So, you know, for instance, having a little bit of grass and not having a few broken down cars in your backyard may qualify you as the best yard in certain neighborhoods. But let's just assume that you live in a neighborhood where people take care of their lawns and you want to have a nice looking lawn too. So I want to go over some of these basic things involved in lawn care that's going to help us achieve that great looking lawn. So if you'll see here, the lawn I'm here on, we deal with Bermuda grass. So I'm in Alabama, and in Alabama we're primarily dealing with warm season grasses. You're talking about Bermuda grass is what I'm primarily seeing, some centipede grass, especially the more south you go, St. Augustine grass, especially the more south you go, and zoysia grass. Okay, as you go further north, you might get in some cool season turf as well. But I'm going to specifically be talking about warm season grasses, meaning those that are going to go dormant in the winter. So you see this Bermuda lawn here. It's got a good color to it. We are in June when this video is being filmed, and there's a couple of things that play into this being a nice lawn. So let's start with some of the basics. So let's start off with this: choosing the right grass type. So you know, like I said, on this yard is a Bermuda yard. Plenty of sun. As you can see, I've got my sunglasses on, not because I'm you know, don't want to look at the camera. It's just it's so bright today that I'm not unable to keep my eyes open without the glasses. So Bermuda loves sun. And see, I see the mistake from homeowners where they will have a yard that gets a lot of shade. Perhaps even some of these newer neighborhoods, you'll see they'll use Bermuda grass. They'll plant a small tree in the front yard, but as that tree begins to get bigger, a lot of times it'll be a Bradford pear, some type of maple or an oak tree or whatever. As it gets bigger, it starts creating more and more shade, which begins to choke out the Bermuda. Not choke it out, but the shade, you know, Bermuda just can't tolerate the shade. And so it creates a problem. Now, I think that's a mistake on the builder, or you know, why they do that, I don't know. But when you're choosing the right grass type for that situation. So in those situations, what do? Well, we tell people, one, if you've got so again, back to choosing the right grass type. If you have a lot of sun, Bermuda's great. You know, again, I'm talking about warm season grass. Bermuda, zoysia, St. Augustine, centipede, they all tolerate sun. They all like sun, okay? But if you end up with a shady area, and this is what I end up with. Well, like I said, we see a lot of Bermuda that begins to struggle as the trees get bigger or in a shady area of the lawn. So I advise people in a couple ways. I said, well, you know what? You can do a couple things there. You could, one, just give up on growing grass there and landscape that area. You know, just forget about trying to get grass to grow under that big oak tree. And what you hate to see people do is they go buy more sod. They think, you know, my grass is dying, so they go buy more Bermuda sod and put it under the oak tree, which, you know, and when I see that, I'm you know, that's not going to do very well. It won't tolerate the shade. So if it's very shady, landscape it, maybe put you some hydrangeas, azaleas. If it gets some sun, then you can go to a more shade tolerant grass. For us here, we recommend people get emerald zoysia. So between the two types of zoysias I deal with primarily, emerald zoysia and Z52, and the emerald zoysia is more shade tolerant. So if you live further toward the coast, or you know, further south, then you might, you know, St. Augustine is also more shade tolerant. I mean, centipede is more shade tolerant. It doesn't do great in shade, but Bermuda is your, you know, basically your worst option, but yet a great option in the sun. So another idea behind choosing the right grass type: if you don't get a lot of, let's say you don't have an irrigation system, it's hot, you don't necessarily like watering your grass, then Bermuda may be your choice because of its extreme drought tolerance, where a zoysia or the other types I've mentioned are less drought tolerant. So consider those factors when choosing the grass type. Now, let's talk about watering, because this is something I see and we talk to people about in my business. I meet with homeowners, and some of them are on either extreme. They're watering all the time, or they don't water at all. You know, well, this past fall, actually in Alabama, we had a historic drought where we literally had no measurable rainfall in my area for 2 months. Okay, that happened in the fall. Sometimes people think, well, my grass is just going dormant, and it was to some extent, but in some extent that damage from the fall really showed up this spring, and you saw the Bermuda grass typically survived, but there was some of the other types, the zoysias, the centipedes, the St. Augustine, that really had some drought damage. So keep that in mind. But when it comes to watering your lawn, this is sort of the principle that we try to teach people, as I've been taught. You want to water, and this holds true in my area. Now, as you get further toward the coast and different climates, you know, there may be some different rules here, but we try to encourage people to water less often, but for longer periods of time, okay? So I tell people all the time, you know, instead of putting that irrigation system 3 times a week for 15 minutes, why not try 1 time a week for 45 minutes, you know, and then you're expecting to get some rain too. So, and you think about that for a second. If you get, just think about it from, you know, away from irrigation, just on rain. So if we get a little afternoon shower, you know, it helps, obviously, but if we get one of those soaking rains that last for several hours, you can noticeably see the difference in your lawn the next day. I mean, I've seen that with a lawn that, like I said, on the Bermuda, you go in the summer, you go 2-3 weeks with no rain, it'll begin to change colors, become a very dull green, or even start to turn brown. It's not dead, it's just sort of going into, you know, drought mode. And when we get a heavy rain, the very next day you can see a significant difference in the color. I mean, so think about it too from the roots. You know, are you trying to create shallow roots, okay, or you want some deep roots that, you know, so you want to water it deep and encourage that deep root growth. Another thing about that, the last training event I went to, kind of a continuing education class, they were talking about the historic drought we had in the fall, and they were educating us on which grasses tolerated the drought best. Well, what came to be true was it wasn't so much about the type of grass, which again, I do think the Bermuda is extremely drought tolerant, more so than others, but they were talking about in each kind of grass, it had a lot to do with the health and the quality of the turf before the drought came. So if you had deep rooted zoysia versus shallow rooted zoysia, it's much more likely that deep rooted zoysia would tolerate the drought much more than the shallow rooted zoysia. So it makes sense. So, all right, so there's watering less often, but for longer periods of time, choosing the right grass type in the right situation, whether you got shade, whether you've got sun, whether you want to water a lot, you don't water a lot, you know yourself. If, you know, say don't plant just like planting a house plant or some sort of shrubs. You know, if you know you don't like trimming shrubs, well, don't plant an Elaeagnus bush that needs trimmed all the time, or a holly bush that needs, you know, constant shaping. Plant something more low maintenance. So know yourself and what's going to work best for you in that situation. Now let's talk about fertilizing. Another key. If you see here, the color of this lawn comes from the fertilizer that's been applied to it. Now, if we wouldn't put any fertilizer in this lawn, it would not have the same dark green, lush color. So, as I've talked about in other videos, when it comes to fertilizing, again, you got to understand your grass type, but on a Bermuda lawn, which can tolerate a lot of nitrogen and can really give you that aggressive growth and really make that grass green. So I'm using on this particular yard a 38% nitrogen. You know, so if you use let's say you went and bought a bag of 888 fertilizer, okay, it's 8%. That first number is your nitrogen, 8% nitrogen. So in a 50-pound bag, you're putting out 4 pounds of nitrogen. Well, I'm using a 38% nitrogen. So in a 50-pound bag, there's 19 pounds of nitrogen. So on that 888, you would have to put out almost 5 times as much of the 888 on this lawn to get as much nitrogen as I'm using in one bag of the 38% nitrogen. Not only that, I'm using a slow release fertilizer. So what's the point of that? You know, I'm using a 16-week polymer coated slow release fertilizer I buy from my supplier, which is Harrell's, and it's the technology called Polyon. So it's got this polymer coating on some of the fertilizer pellets. Some of it's quick release, okay, so you get that quick green color you're looking for, but a lot of it is that slow release polymer coated fertilizer. So what does that do? For 16 weeks, that polymer coating is slowly breaking down, giving the lawn the nitrogen at a rate that it can actually use it. So what's the problem if you just dump a whole lot of fertilizer on your lawn in a quick release fashion? Well, the problem is it's that whole drinking out of a fire hose situation. You know, you're putting more fertilizer, more nitrogen on your lawn than the lawn can actually use. So a lot of it is just wasted and it doesn't last. So that polymer coating on the slow release fertilizer, one, can help your lawn not burn up, you know, not burn it up if it doesn't get water, because it's not putting all the nitrogen on there at one time. Two, it's giving it the nitrogen at a rate it can use for a period of months. Okay, so that makes sense. So a steady green color for months as opposed to a burst of green and then slowly fading out. So that's why you've got this consistent green color that will last for months, you know, with you know, rain and that sort of thing, or irrigation. So the water's key, the fertilizer's key. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about your actual mowing practices. Again, this can vary on yard to yard. So for this particular yard, on a Bermuda yard that's been fertilized, that's been watered properly, it's going to grow in the summer, and it's going to grow pretty aggressively. So some people, they don't like cutting grass, so they don't want to pay somebody to cut the grass, or not that often. So they might only cut the grass once every 2 weeks. Well, when the Bermuda is growing aggressively, and you come out there to cut it every 2 weeks, if you're taking off, 5 inches off the grass, it's hard to do that without taking some of that green color off the lawn. So what we encourage people to do is, cut your grass more often, especially if you want to keep it green without taking, the rule of thumb is don't take more than 1/3 of the blade of grass off. Well, that's going to require you to cut the grass more often. Some people want to keep it low, but don't want to cut it often. Well, that's not really an option when it's been fertilized and watered properly and it's really growing. So you're going to have to cut the grass more often. You see people with a real mower. I ran a guy yesterday, had a real mower out there cutting his Bermuda lawn. I said, how often do you cut your grass? He said, about every 3 days. So they're cutting it very often to keep it short, and they're watering it regular. So if you don't like watering regular, then you might want to let your grass grow a little taller. Again, different kind of grass might require different mowing. So if you got a centipede lawn, you might want to mow it frequently and keep it low. Bermuda will tolerate being left long or short. But like I said, if you want to keep it short, you have to mow it more often and keep the water to it. So these are a few of the tips. I want to also talk to you about weed control. Now this is very important, and this is what I do for a living. So I tell people this, a homeowner, calls me out to do weed control, and we talk about it, and they don't want to hire me. So I just try to give them some basic information. I was like, you know what, if you want to do this yourself, that's totally fine. Let me give you some basic information on these, like I said, dealing with warm season grasses here in the South primarily. So I tell people at a very minimum, you need to do 3 things to your yard, okay, at a very minimum. Now I do more than that, but one is put out your pre-emergent in the spring or late winter. So that is all varied based on where you live, the weather we get that year. It's not even the same year to year. And when those warm season weeds like crabgrass begin to germinate. So here in Alabama, the part of Alabama I'm in, typically mid-March, is about the time when that the outside air temperature makes the soil temperature reach a certain point that crabgrass is going to begin to germinate. Well, I need to have my pre-emergent applied before then if I'm going to prevent crabgrass and other warm season weeds. So I need to put out a quality pre-emergent in the spring before mid-March. Like I said, I'm saying here, you know, I mean, as my business, we do it, you know, January, come back again, do a second round in March or so. So now, so that's one thing. Then you want to at least put some sort of fertilizer on. I think some people think you can just pound a yard with weed control. I don't like weeds, you know, they're like, I'm not so concerned about it being green. I just really don't want weeds in my yard. Well, you don't want to continually pound a yard with herbicides trying to control the weeds without trying to get, you know, one of the best things you can do to keep the weeds out is have a thick, healthy turf. So you want to apply some measure of fertilizer on your lawn to get the grass to fill in, okay? And that will greatly reduce the number of weeds you have that you have to deal with. So applying fertilizer, like I said, what I use is on this Bermuda yard, I'm using a 38% nitrogen slow release fertilizer. Applying it sometime around May at 2.2 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. There's other videos out here that talk about that. On a centipede yard, St. Augustine yard, I'm using a lot less nitrogen on those yards. On a centipede, I'm down to, you know, I'm only using like 0.8 pounds of nitrogen twice a year. So I do it in May, maybe come back in July, using an 18% nitrogen. So I'm using an 1809 blend, putting it out at a rate of around 0.8 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet twice a year, okay? So it's a different strategy. Centipede doesn't want near as much nitrogen as this Bermuda can tolerate. So understand the type of grass you have and what you're trying to accomplish with a fertilizer. And then, so you put out that pre-emergent in the spring, put out that some fertilizer around May when the weather starts to get warm. And then, again, this is just at the very least, come back in the fall. And again, it varies by region, varies year to year. When that weather starts to cool off and that the soil temperature reaches a certain cool degrees, that it begins to let the cool season weeds germinate. Stuff that I deal with here, you're talking about henbit, you're talking about poania, stuff like that we deal with, that you'll start to really see in January, February, well, mostly February, March, but that is germinating back in the fall. So typically here, when is that? In my area, in this Birmingham market, you're looking at sometime around mid to early September. Again, wherever you are, it's going to change, you know. So I want to have that fall pre-emergent out before those weeds germinate. So, you know, if I think those weeds are germinating mid-September, we need to have that fall pre-emergent out early September. You don't want to do it too early. You don't want to say, well, I'll just put it out in August. That way I'll be safe, because it's going to start to break down. It's not going to do as good a job preventing those weeds as if you get closer to the actual date. So again, that's not everything that you have to do to have a great lawn. I mean, the pre-emergent doesn't get all weeds. That's where you come in using, and this will be another point, just dealing with post-emergent, so understanding how to get the weeds that break through the pre-emergent or the pre-emergent doesn't work on. So there's certain weeds that still show up in the lawn, and that's where maybe just with a backpack sprayer, a handheld sprayer, you can walk around in your own home lawn with different products I'm using regularly as post-emergent. I'm using MSM Turf, I'm using Celsius, I'm using Change Up, I'm using a product called Blindside, other products that I can go out there and depending on what type of weeds a certain lawn has, I can take that product and start to eliminate the weeds that do come through, because the pre-emergent is not a, you know, it doesn't get all weeds every year. And so you're going to have some breakthrough, and those you deal with a post-emergent. So these are just a few things on how to have a great looking lawn like this lawn. If you have comments, you can shoot them to me in here, and if you haven't subscribed, I'm going to continue to hopefully post more and more videos on, you know, how to have a beautiful lawn, both for the homeowner, both for those in the lawn business, you know, people that want their yard to look good, whether they're doing it for themselves or for a customer. So we can talk more and more about specific weeds you're dealing with. You can also leave your comments, but subscribe if you haven't, and look forward to more videos soon. Thanks.